This is Access LaPorte County, Channel 97. Coming up next is the August 15th meeting of the Long Beach Advisory Plan Commission. You can find more information for this meeting at www.accesslaportecounty.org.
All right, welcome everybody to the Advisory Plan Commission of 8/14/22. Order. Roll call. Marilyn McFadden. Here. Robert Lemay. I'm here. Mike Johnstone.
Here.
On Zoom. Doug Beaver. Here. Seth McCormick. Here. Matthew Karstrand. Here. Okay, approval of minutes. I'm not sure if we approve these minutes, but I would make a motion to approve the minutes of 5/23, 6/20, and 8/1/22. Would you want to second it?
No.
Discussion. All right,
I second it.
Okay, since we have one member on Zoom, we're going to have to do roll call votes. So Mary McFadden?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Johnstone?
Aye.
Doug Beeler?
Aye.
Seth McCormick? Aye. Matthew Karstrand?
Aye.
All right. So, old business. We've got the possible amendment to the stair ordinance, and that was because people weren't hearing back from the DNR and Army Corps, but Chris used and they said that they would approve permits, right?
And I think they have, and Larry received same information, I believe, from a different contact. So I spoke to counsel for the DNR. They are indeed issuing permits of stairs that are in their jurisdiction. So based on that, I don't think there's any need to change it. Whether they're granting anything or doing anything about things that they determine not to be in their jurisdiction, I don't know. But that part of, bottom line is our conversation was discussing the town was just interested in making sure that the policies were aligned and that, we weren't stepping on their toes, but we wanted to make sure we confirm that information because there was a possible amendment that would be done if they weren't considering or doing anything about it, but that indeed is not the case. And in fact, the example was the Clifford residents, which they said they just recently issued one.
All right, so there's no need to change that ordinance, which is great. Let's work for us. All right. And also on old business is the BZA appointment from the APC. Now, at the last meeting, we said we were going to take that up at this meeting. We were going to have an executive meeting of the APC to discuss how that works. I haven't scheduled that yet. I guess the question is, the town is going to be appointing another member to the Advisory Plan Commission. The question is, do we want to wait for that member to appoint the member from this committee to the Board of Zoning Appeals? That was.
So to put that in English, there's 7 members here, correct? Right now you have 6. There is a BZA opening that comes from the nomination from this commission. So the issue is, do you wait till you have a full commission or do you not? So it will take 4 votes. So it's 4 votes of the number of members that are the total number of members that are required for the ABC.
So, thoughts, anybody? What do we want to do?
I would like to wait until we have a full board.
Any other discussion?
You have somebody in mind for the?
Well, we actually have a number of people who said they'd be willing to do that. Of the people that we have here right now, we have just one person who's eligible, and that would be Seth. If the town council appoints another member, then that would be, because that means the person who we appoint to the BZA has to be willing to serve.
Yeah, how does voting work? Does it need to, if I'm the appointee, or does the appointee get to vote or no?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I see no reason to delay.
motion?
I'll make a motion to, go ahead and vote on the new member of the APC that is gonna also serve on the BZA.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, so we have a motion, a second, discussion? Okay, so we have a motion in favor. We have to do this roll call vote. So Mary Lou,
No,
Mike Johnson.
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Doug Beamer,
Aye.
Seth McCormick,
Aye.
Matthew Kurtzman.
Aye.
All right, would anybody like to make a nomination for the member of the APC to serve on the BZA?
I'd like to nominate Seth McCormick.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Any discussion? All right, roll call vote. Mary Lou McFadden?
No,
Robert Ryan, I'm an aye. Mike Johnston? I'm sorry, say that again.
No.
Doug Beeler?
Aye.
Seth McCormick?
Aye.
Matthew Kurtzman?
Aye.
All right, congratulations, Seth. All right, new business, we have none. Public hearing, so this is a continuation of the hearing on the steep slope ordinance. Before we open the public hearing, I'd like Larry Wall, who's in attendance on Zoom, to comment on the two pertinent comments that we had at the last public hearing. We had comments from Tim Anderson and William DeBon. Larry, are you okay to address those?
Sure. The first one, Mr. Anderson at stop 29, I can't remember his address. He had talked about the movement of the soil, sand at his home, and that the dunes were, he didn't use the term dynamic, but that's what we would call it in our industry, is dynamic. Mount Baldy is a dynamic dune. There's not enough vegetation on Mount Baldy with the blowing sand, so the sand continues to build up and it continues to move back. Anyone who's lived here for a number of years knows Mount Baldy creeps back. They used to say it crept anywhere from inches to feet a year. I'm not really sure how that is measured or if it's still moving. The sand that we have here, and I suppose you could have an engineer tell you all the different kinds of sand that make up our sand, but most of the Great Lake or Lake Michigan Basin is sand that's from quartz. And the sand, I lived since 1964, about 6 houses down from Mr. Anderson's, and there is blowing sand, but the vegetation stops it from impacting movement, or I should say, the impact or the movement of the dune. Just like the marmon grass or dune grass is what we always called it, stops as the dunes build up or the sand builds back along the stops that the water was up at the seawall. As that sand builds back, you'll see the dune grass start to grow. And the sand that blows from the beach area does build up because the blades of the dune grass stop it, just like a snow fence does. So we don't have the dynamic dunes that on the hillside that like Mount Baldy. So there are certainly, and Mr. Anderson's property in the back, I think he made mention of his stairs. And his stairs on that particular property in the back or the Ridge Roadside are up against a neighbor's home, neighbor's lot, not their home. So if he talked about if he took his stairs out, there would be a problem. There would be a problem there, and that's what we're trying to address. His stairs have been built on the dune, so to say, but the dune hasn't been moving. The stairs are just like anything else, subject to buildup of blowing sand as well as erosion from water that moves through the sand. And I think most of the problems at his rear stairs are from water moving from the upper area of Ridge Road down towards where his house sits. I'm not finding fault with anything that he said, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that because of the vegetation that we have on dunes, especially on the hillside, those dunes don't really move. Like everybody thinks of Mount Baldy as a dynamic situation. The other one, I can't recall I don't actually know how to pronounce his name, unfortunately. I'm sorry. He sent a pretty detailed report into you guys, which I was privy to a copy of, and it's very well written and it has a lot of information in it. I think the crux of what my understanding is that the APC wants to not change the ordinance, but make it more enforceable so that everybody understands what's going on. I would have to ask Chris, we do have a steep slope ordinance. And I think what you guys are trying to do is simplify it to the point where, like other states, it is a set slope. And that set slope, as we mentioned last meeting, can be set in degrees or a number of rise to run, just like a roof is. But and I think a lot of times people get caught up in, is the run, meaning the flat part of that, is that the 3, and then the T or the other axis is the 1. As long as everybody understands fully what you're trying to attain, and that's what Mr. Devon's report was very specific about, even to the point of talking about the different types of sand. I think the town, my understanding was the town was interested in being a little more general so that each property could be evaluated individually if somebody wanted to build on it. And that those slopes or angle of repose, I should say, are the ones that I sent you guys for dry sand, wet sand, and then sand with water. And I use the analogy of digging a hole on the beach. The other one, which most everybody's pretty familiar with, when you drive by NIPSCO's power plant here on the lakefront, you'll see that coal chute dropping coal. And that coal pile is the natural repose of coal. There's no artificial means of retaining it. And that's the sand is the exact same way. We as humans, if nothing would happen, everything would look like Mount Baldy. That's dry sand's natural repose. But as the town of Long Beach is very aware, everybody wants to build, and we want to build into the dunes. And the town, as well as most people, I think, that live here, want to preserve that environment. So in order to do that, you want to maintain the grade as much as possible without disturbing your neighbors, without disturbing the entire dune. I mean, as you all know, where the NIPSCO, and I'm not picking on NIPSCO, where the NIPSCO plant is now was what it was commonly referred to as the Hoosier Slide. And it's gone. People just plowed it over. And you could certainly take some of the lots on Lakeshore Drive and just cut the tops off of them and build on there. And I think that what this ordinance is trying to do is maintain the topography that we have. And how do we do that? In order to protect not only the natural environment, but also to protect the neighbors. And that's when retaining the steep slopes comes into play. And so my understanding is what you guys want to do is say, okay, if a slope is over this, and let's use the 34 degrees, Bob, I think that was in that chart that I sent you. If it's over 34 degrees, that sand is not going to stay by itself. It may if it's damp, It may if there's some roots in it, but if you leave it to its own design, it's going to fall back to that slope. So I think what you guys are having the biggest problem with is determining what that slope is. And that is in those charts that I sent you. And in order to, how do you determine that? I know there was some discussion about, well, what if somebody wants to build a set of stairs like Mr. Anderson? Well, Mr. Anderson's stairs are built into the dune. I think that most stairs that you see now, especially on properties that are on steep slopes, be it Silvertip area, the hillside of Lakeshore Drive, even out in front of my house, if somebody were to take some of these lots here, you can either cut the dune away or cut into it. But if you're going to build a set of stairs on it, normally you build them above the slope. So that usually wouldn't be, that type of thing, a deck and stairs wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to hire an engineer for that. And I would think that the town would want to make the ordinance specific enough to say, listen, after this slope, this is what we want you to do. But it should be done, my opinion is it should be done on a case-to-case basis, because every lot that's left out here is going to be different. And I don't know that you could be so specific to the point where you would hardly need an engineer, but then I don't know if all of us could actually sit down and come to an agreement between a homeowner, an architect, and the building commission as to what they need to do. I think if you make it to the point where you use the standard slope like the other states do, and I think Seth did some homework there, and be reasonable, then each time somebody comes up with something, you analyze it. You go out to the site. The state of Michigan still does that. If I want to build something up on a dune, on the Ford Dune up in the towns that are close to us, I have to call the Department of Environmental Quality. They send somebody out. They have rules just like we want to have here, but they come out, they send an individual engineer out, and they meet with you on site and determine what should be done. And then they take that back to the department, and the permit is applied for based on those recommendations. I don't know if any of that made sense, but I think that's kind of in a nutshell what you guys want to do.
So just a couple of questions, Larry. So 2-to-1, 2 vertical to 1 horizontal, is that the same as 34 degrees?
No.
I think it's a little bit off from that. I don't have the chart in front of me. I don't know if one of you guys has the chart in front of you.
I have the chart. So 2-to-1 is 26.57. 1.73 to 1 is 30 degrees, and 1-to-1 is 45 degrees.
Right. 1-to-1 is the probably pretty close to the natural pose. I gave you another chart that had the dry sand. That's what we deal with here. When you cut into the dune that has vegetation, the sand is moist, but as 2 days, 3 days after you leave, that moisture dries out and the sand starts to slough off. But Seth, I think there's the one that has both the degrees and the rise and run of dry sand. That's probably what I would suspect that you would want to use.
Your recommendation would be 45 degrees or 1-to-1, is that right?
I don't think that's what he said.
No?
Do you guys have the chart there? I'm sorry, I should have put it up or printed it off and had a look at it.
I thought I printed it out, but it doesn't look like I did, but I'm gonna pull it on my phone.
Do you have the chart in front of you, Seth, that has wet sand, dry sand, and water?
That's what I'm trying to pull up. I have the other chart you said that are degrees.
I have the one that just has the sand dries 34 degrees, sand water
Right.
fills 15 to 30, and sand wet is 45.
That's my recollection as well.
So I guess to answer your question, Bob, and that's what I meant about everybody looks at things differently. An architect uses one measurement, an engineer may use another, and three of my guys standing out in the middle of the field may use something else. 3 to 1, 1 to 3, but it's the degree on that slope that you want to match. The other chart that I sent you shows each one of those degrees and shows you what the equivalent rise and run is, as well as the degrees. And does anybody have that in front of them?
I do, and that's the point, is that that chart skips from 30 degrees to 45 degrees, so 34 degrees is going to be in the middle of 1.1 to 1.73, which is 30 degrees, and 1 to 2, which is 45 degrees.
Right, and that's, you'll notice, and I think Seth, you made mention that I know Michigan uses 1 to 3, and I'm not sure what Illinois uses. But
I guess that's part of my question, because I like the scientific-based approach to this. Like that we need a logical basis for, making these height requirements. I like that it's a scientific basis for that. And so I guess the question would be what, initially it sounds like you recommended 1 to 2. And that was a change from the current, not ordinance, but whatever we're calling it,
Resolution.
which was 1 to 3. And then you have Michigan that has 1 to 3, and then Beverly Shores that has 1 to 3. Do you have any idea why it was initially set at 1 to 3? And, if we went with a 34 degrees or 1 to 1.73, would we be like sufficiently protecting the dims?
I believe so. I'm not. And again, you have to understand that the 34 degrees, it depends on how you look at it. As I said, a roof slope, people use the run of 12 inches to a rise of X. And that's how most people tend to look at it, as a 90-degree angle. And what is less than that, obviously we can't have a 90-degree angle here. A 45 is pretty much considered acceptable in this area, which is what we talked about originally, I think. So I think you guys might be able to, or might get tangled up in the rise and run over the degrees. The degrees are about as scientific as you're going to get. And what that converts to in a rise and run, I think, as you mentioned, Seth, was 1 point something to whatever. But it's the degrees, that's the science end of it. Everybody understands that at 34 degrees, you're going to have to retain sand for any length of time that you're going to leave it open.
Your recommendation, Mary, would be 34 degrees, and is that something that would be easily measured by a prospective contractor?
Yes.
And is there any benefit to putting a small buffer in there for human error and measuring the degrees? And I don't
Certainly you can. It's actually, believe it or not, you can go out to Menards and for about $15 buy a little level that has an arm on it that swings up, and you can get the degrees and to the exact degree. So it's really not very difficult to do. It's really more of an understanding. And again, I think that the goal of the town is to protect people, protect the land, number one, but number two, to protect the adjacent property owners from destruction of their property. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
That sounds right. That's right. And I think too, getting it right so that we're not making it onerous for somebody to build on property on their own.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't want to make the standard something that is unnecessary to create additional expense if it's not necessary to protect the dim.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, there are a couple of proposed buildings or homes right now that have been issued permits based on X, but the homeowners are having a hard time trying to figure out, or the proposed homeowners are really having a hard time trying to figure out how are they going to retain the soil within our present ordinance because of the expense. You don't want to spend $300,000 or $400,000 trying to get a home site and then put up a $400,000 house on it. So yeah, you want to be specific enough, but as I said, every piece of land out here that could be built on now or in the future should be looked at individually.
So what would be your recommendation then in creating a standard? Or is it just if it exceeds a certain percentage, then you have to have somebody come in and tell you what's safe and what's not? Or is it just that everything that's built on a dune needs to have an evaluation, which also is expensive?
Seth, the answer to that is you should establish the minimum standard, which I think is at 34 degrees. I would say that. And then if somebody wants to build, I don't think it's the town's responsibility to engineer their project. I think that in that ordinance that you should make it perfectly clear that the town requires a report from a licensed engineer to protect not only the neighbors, but also to protect the land.
Larry, this is Chris. We're talking in circles on the numbers. So the way the ordinance is proposed is simply the steep slope resolution as it's been in place for years. The issue is what language are we going to change? Because right now it has the vertical and horizontal plane language. So is the language then going to just be that they need an engineering study, and I'm paraphrasing here, on any lot that has a slope steeper than 34 degrees on wet sand or dry sand?
On dry sand, I think that's fine. There's no guesswork then.
And my only concern, I basically think that's probably right. My only concern is that are we going to run into issues with somebody who's at 35 saying it's 33?
That's why, that's why it has to be evaluated, and that's why the state of Michigan does. I'm not familiar with Illinois, but I do know, and same in Beverly Shores. The individual site, the 34 degrees is a general guideline, and individual sites need individual attention because you can't drive down Lakeshore Drive or walk outside of my house or up on Silvertip, although Silvertip is pretty standard, and determine that a grade, the degree of grade or the slope of the grade or repose of the grade is the same in any 15 or 20 foot distance. It's going to change. So I think that's what Mr. Dubon was trying to do, was be very, very specific. And if that's what you guys want to do, I think that's fine too. That puts a little more of a burden on the town for enforcement, because you are now taking on, I think and Chris, I'd have to ask, I guess I'm asking you this, if the town would be willing to take on the responsibility of determining those grades, or do we want to say, this is the guidelines that we set, and you need to have an engineer come in at your expense to determine how you can retain this soil?
And that's why I suggest something slightly below 34, like 30.
That's fine. That's what I meant earlier, Seth, is not to get, I think the more you dive into those numbers, I think you're going to find yourself in a sticky wicket situation. If you take and if you want to go back to the 1 to 2 or the 1 to 3, that's pretty basic. And anybody gets involved in a slope that's in that range has to have an engineer.
And then, I mean, maybe the engineering report can obviate the need for some of the other kind of more expensive parts of the ordinance. So I'm saying, I don't want to just like rush this. I feel like we have something in place that's protecting the dude now, right? I mean, is it worth it to kind of think about and then like kind of maybe do a step-by-step process if it exceeds 30, you need an engineering report that, you need an engineering report that like sets forth the plans and how you're going to protect the dune. And before construction starts, the board or the building commission essentially makes a determination of whether or not they need the insurance policy based on the risk. I don't want to make it overly complicated, but I also don't want to make it overly expensive. And I think it's important that we protect both people's property and the dune itself.
Yes.
I think the trouble we get in is leaving that gray area of determining. So I understand your point, and maybe there is a better way. Maybe you decide you want to continue the public hearing again. Nobody's here because, the next step is taking obviously a decision to pass this on to the council or not. And you're right, we'd like to get it right and so that it is flexible. I'm concerned about the gray area and having just not in the perception of it being applied the same way to each, the perception of it and how it's actually applied and given that discretion. There is a lot of discretion here already. They could require a heightened value of insurance, et cetera, but making, I don't know if that chart is the way to go, but
I'm all for getting the standard set, and if we're here and prepared to move forward, I'm not going to get in the way of it. I think we should just need to set the right number, and then maybe that will give us time to think about and see how it's implemented, see how it goes to determine whether we need to change it or not. In the future.
One other concern Mr. Anderson had was, he said his lot had 3 distinct areas where there was different grades areas. And I would think that if we're going to set, say, 34 degrees, the 34 degrees would be the maximum slope in the area where you're doing your construction. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes, but I think in particular, if you look at Mr. Anderson's lot, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that stretch between stop 29 and 30. As you go along that particular stop, most of those houses have a single slope from from Lakeshore Drive grade up to the building platform. How are those created over the years? I mean, if you start at Bob Rules at the corner, you'll see that when the roads came in, when when Belle Plaine was cut through, they just laid that right on top of the dune, and it goes up to the top of the hill. Ridge Road cuts through in the back where they cut through some of the dune areas. And then when you look at the Lakeshore Drive side of those homes, most of those homes are on the top side or the top peak, whatever you want to call it, of the foredune. So from the house back down to Lakeshore Drive is a single slope. Some have been terraced, where they started at Lakeshore Drive, they built a wall up 3 or 4 feet, then they cut back or horizontal, then built another vertical wall. In Mr. Anderson's property in particular, if you look on each side of his property, I think it's the one to the west has a similar situation as he does. And then you stop at the next house, you move to the next house west, and that is just a single slope. There aren't a lot of dunes that have that rumple effect. I don't even know if that's really not a right term, but that have I think he has 1, 2, 3. He probably has 4 separate rises and runs on his property. If you considered his property a set of stairs, most of the properties to the east and the 2 properties to the west have a single slope like a slide. So that's really not very common out here. And whether that was man-made or not, I can't say. But those slopes, that stair-step effect on his property is being held that way by vegetation.
Okay, so 34 degrees would be the maximum slope in the actual area where you're doing the construction. That's what we want to stay to be specific. The other thing to remember is there's a little buffer here too, in that the state now has this agency called MS4, and everybody who builds on a steep slope near a sensitive waterway like Lake Michigan has to have an MS4 permit. And so the town actually has an MS4 permitter who, actually, I'm going to be meeting with them tomorrow. But people who build on a steep slope near Lake Michigan, they have to do that. In fact, anybody who builds on a lot larger than an acre, though we don't have many of those, we have plenty of. So that will give us a little bit of backup, I guess. If we do miss something, MS4 might pick up on it. So I guess, and then the other issue I think we want to get clear on here is that issue of that this does not apply to stairs or decks built over a steep slope, but it does apply to stairs or decks
Yes.
built to a slope, right?
Absolutely.
So, Chris, I think if we can make those changes, stairs or decks built over a steep slope are not included in this ornament or this ordinance, but stairs or decks built into a steep slope do fall under this ordinance.
Maybe consider putting in the permit subject to a condition upon MS4 approval. Because it consider where it says building permit subject to, shall be subject or condition upon the following additional requirements. You can just make it clear to them so that they know, presumably they will know that they have to qualify, but at least it'll be pointing them out for those.
Yeah, it'd be good to put that about MS4 in the ordinance, that way people know they need that permit also. I think that'd be great. So I guess my recommendation would be to have Chris make those changes and bring it back to us next month. Because we're making a lot of changes here and we want to be sure we get it right. So I'll make that motion.
Well, is the number 34?
I think that's what we're at.
I will get, if you guys want me to, I'll get a list and some sheets that I'll send off to you either by email or send them to Tim Perry and he can print them out for you guys. Of not only those two charts that I sent to you, but I can give you, I think I can find some engineering examples so you can actually look at a drawing of what we have here and what you can and can't do and the way you look at it, whether it's rise and run or whether it's degrees. And as Chris mentioned, it's pretty easy to find a lot of gray area because there's so many different ways to measure it. And, I think if you pick one, you couldn't have two, because if you do, that's why people get fouled up. I also think it's important that everybody understands that it's not the town's responsibility to design anything, that we would review the design that was done by an outside agency.
Good. All right, so this was supposed to be a public hearing. Is there anybody either here or on Zoom who wants to speak or in favor of this ordinance?
Bob, can I make one comment? This is Zafar Rizvi, if I can, please.
Absolutely, yep. Go ahead, Zafar.
I think the only comments I have, 1636 Lakewood Drive, I never used to have any dunes on back of my house. And then both dunes on my right and left, which is of our neighbors, from last few years, they continue to wash and carry on pushing the sand on my side. And last year, literally, almost sand pushed that from those dunes almost 2 to 3 feet right in front of my exit door to the beach, which was never there, and it was completely flat. And I actually tried to put some grass seed last few years to make sure that some dunes grass grow, so that way it has some grip. But now what do you do when the sand is coming from your both side of the neighbors, of the dunes washing away, and they are bringing right to my, pushing it right to my house, and even pushing inside the house. And it's, right on my yard. And your ordinance does not allow to move any sands. And now it's the natural sands which is coming. And if you look at most of the communities around, now they're trying to push some sand back to the lake so that it does not continue to destroy and the lake does not stay that way. So you can do also study to find out why people are pushing sands back to the lake instead of just artificially continue to build more dunes, which they was never was there. And those dunes also very like a sand. They just goes down and up, goes and down, up. And they are all coming from the both side of the neighbor's house. So I don't really know what will be the solution for that kind of situation. Since we are discussing, we don't want to hurt the neighbor's property, but those two neighbors are hurting my property.
This ordinance is really geared toward construction. But yeah, I take it your neighbors haven't done any recent construction that led to this.
Oh, no, I don't plan to do any construction and I don't have, but I'm just, problem is that is the sand is coming right inside my house. And since you don't, your ordinance don't allow unnatural sand, which is coming, not anything to do with dunes, that also destroying people's properties.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, this I don't think addresses that issue.
Sure. No, I understand that, but I think that since we're talking about sand and dunes, I wanted to point that out. That's also happening.
Sure.
And now, since the ordinance doesn't allow me, and it's carry on moving slowly, and last year, specifically last year, almost 2.5 feet built up. From both sides of the dunes washed out, and sand coming to me right in the middle. And it's no fault of mine, but it's destroying my property. And also, that's the reason several times, you can ask John Wall, and I have sent that email, those your discharge pipes, stormwater pipes, they're literally buried. I have to open it to discharge that water, and that consistently, continuously carry on burning those discharge pipes also. And that's really is, that clearly the evidence shows where those pipes were and how they are buried now in last couple of years, specifically last year. So I just wanted to point that out. Also, this is also really happening, that something which is naturally happening, and we are not allowed to move that. And it has nothing to do with dunes. So I think I will request that some other time, please look into it.
Safar, what was your address?
It's a 1636 Lakeshore Drive. And John Wall can say, the other people can say they visited those pipes, stone pipes, that was clearly out there without buried under the sand. Now they are continue to carry on burning under the sand.
Anybody else want to speak? I guess I asked in favor first time. Anybody else want to speak in favor of the ordinance? Anybody else want to speak against the ordinance? I'll make a motion that we continue the public hearing to next month.
Did we vote on the changes Chris is going to make?
Yeah, you want to go through them? Yep, we can. First would be the issue that this does not apply to stairs or decks built above steep slopes, only applies to stairs or decks built into steep slopes. I'll make that motion.
I second.
Do we have to do a roll call?
Yeah, we do number 3, yeah. Mary Lou?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Johnston?
Aye.
Brett Beaver?
Aye.
Seth McCormick?
Aye.
Matthew Carsman?
Aye.
All right, second one would be, we go with 34 degrees. I'll make that motion.
On dry sand.
Well, it's all, I think it's all dry sand, right, Larry?
Well, that's the issue is do we need a distinguisher or not? So,
I think we definitely.
I think that's what Mr. Dubon was trying to do, was trying to get into the specifics of that. And I think you certainly can. And that's why I mentioned it. Each property really needs an independent analysis. In general, I think somebody from the town could go out and look at it and take the measurement. But anything over X, slope X, or degree X, and you can include those in the ordinance, would require an engineer.
Right, but if we go with 34 degrees, actually on wet sand, if you were gonna put a limit, that limit would be higher, right? It would be 40 degrees maybe.
Yes, that's correct. But that wet sand, I have been building, or we've lived here since '64. I've been building here since God knows when, but there's no wet sand left around here.
So it sounds like we're safe with 34 degrees. That's what I'm hearing. You okay with that, Seth?
I think so.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to go with 34 degrees.
I second it. I second it.
Mary Lou McFadden?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Johnstone?
Aye.
Brett Beaver?
Aye.
Seth McCormick?
Aye.
Matthew Carsman? Aye. Okay, the next thing is that the 34 degrees applies to just the area of construction, not the entire lot. So I'll make that motion.
I second it.
Further discussion? Mary Lou?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Johnstone?
Aye.
Brett Beaver?
Aye.
Seth McCormick?
Aye.
Matthew Carsman? Aye.
The additional MS4 permit.
Oh, and yeah, and then we wanted to add about, that, to put in there that people also who are building on a steep slope near, I guess let's just call it,
the additional requirements. It's still a condition about the following. So if they have to do
right,
first part,
but MS4 only applies to steep slopes near waterways. So this would be, so MS4 would be required for building on steep slopes near waterways. I think either side of Lakeshore Drive would probably apply to that, but inland probably not, unless of course you're next to Lake Claire.
Oh,
what
there's
condition?
no steep slope.
What if you put in there obtaining any required permits
Yeah.
from MS4?
Yeah, if MS4 is required, we need to see it. Yeah, that'd be a good way to put it. Yeah, that way we're not set. So that would be my motion, that if an MS4 permit is required, that gets submitted to the building commission.
I second it.
Mary Lou?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Johnson?
Aye.
Beaver?
Aye.
Seth McCormick? Aye. Matthew Carsman? Aye. Okay, so with those changes, I would make a motion that we continue the public hearing to the next meeting.
I second it.
Oh.
You can take it.
Mary Lou?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Johnson?
Aye.
Brett Beaver?
Aye.
Seth McCormick?
Aye.
Matthew Carsman? Aye. Okay. So the public hearing is closed for today. Any public comments? On Zoom? Closing matters, the next meeting is scheduled for 9/19 at 7 PM. I make a motion to adjourn.
I second it.
I'm an aye. Mary Lou?
Aye.
Mike Johnson?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Seth McCormick?
Aye.
Matthew Carsman? Aye. Cool, thanks, everybody.